So, setting the stage. We're going to jump right in. One of our key notions is that unless we control our time, no one else is going to honor our time. No one else is going to control our time for us. So if you don't control your time, events, other people, circumstances will. And therefore, there's a question. What of your day can you control? Absolutely, that you do have control over. What do you not have total control over, but what can you influence? What are the circumstances, the situations that you could begin to adjust in your favor, if you will? And then what are the obstacles or the events, the circumstances that are truly beyond your influence to control? Doug?
Yeah, I think it's one thing that's important to remember is with the relationship of attorneys and time is that we have control over our time. And what I mean is time marches on regardless of what we do, but we can absolutely control our attitudes and the decisions we make about time. And so as a mindset going into the program today, rather than having your relationship with time perhaps being, gee, I'm trying to keep up, think about how do I manage my choices about how I'm using my time.
So how do you think about time? Attorneys have a couple of key ways in which they relate to time because it's built into the very system of practicing law. Obviously, how you relate to your billable time or conceive of time around the relationship between your time and revenue is probably the predominant notion that everybody thinks of when they think about time. Utilization and realization. How much time am I spending on doing revenue-producing work, and how much time am I spending on other things or non-billable time? And then some of you, of course, if you're doing class action work or qui tam or whistleblower, you're not billing by the hour, so you have a different perspective on the billable hour per se. But you're thinking about how efficient can I be, because at the end of the day, revenue is related to efficiency, not necessarily a discrete unit of time, as Doug, you
I think
said.
One of the challenges, Bill, that we have in the practice as lawyers is that we are always trying to keep up with time, and we're tracked in terms of billable hours. And what we don't really understand when I was practicing law was that this sets up a competitive relationship with the clock. And we are forever trying to beat the clock. There was even the old show, Beat the Clock. So we have to understand that fundamentally that competition is built into how lawyers think about time, and we do need to change how we're thinking about that.
There's also deadlines and pressures, right? So that's another way that you're relating to time is what's coming up next, what's always due. Some of the deadlines are hard deadlines that you actually have no control over. Some of the deadlines, going back to the previous slide, are negotiable deadlines. And we hope that through this webinar, that you'll get a handle on what are the things that you can influence, what are the negotiable circumstances, so that you can feel that you have more control. We want to move the continuum from, geez, I cannot control this, to I have complete control, and saying, I have more control than I realize, and that's what we hope you'll get at the end of this seminar. So, we speak of the lawyers who are really competent with time and feel that they have good control of themselves and their circumstances and are not weighed down, not as harried as some attorneys are, as being time savvy. They get it. They take time to understand their relationship to time. And the first quality or characteristic of being a time savvy attorney, we like to call it, is to have clear objectives, to really understand what you're trying to accomplish on a daily, weekly basis, and we'll speak about that in a minute.
And important about, Bill, having the clear objectives is not just saying, gee, I want to get through my day,
right,
or I need to complete this case, but breaking your case or your matter you're working on that day down into specific manageable parts. And the clearer your objectives are, the more likely you are to achieve them. And we'll talk more about that later.
And time-savvy attorneys are also disciplined, and there's really no magic bullet here. This is going to be about changing behaviors, mindsets, routines, developing new routines. So the attorneys who you look at your colleagues and you say, boy, they don't seem as stressed, even though they may be high-powered, they may be working on really complex matters, but they're not as frazzled, perhaps, as some. They tend to be disciplined about doing certain things on a regular basis. They're also organized, and we're going to share with you some of the routines that you can become more disciplined about and some of the tools and techniques you can use to get yourself more organized. Even if you're already organized, is there a way that you can become more efficient with regard to managing the information, which is the lifeblood, obviously, of what you do? And time-savvy attorneys are terrific communicators. We have an entire section, one of the 8 elements, is about managing expectations of your lateral partners, the folks that you're managing up, the folks you're managing down, clients, vendors, outside counsel. Your ability to communicate explicitly, clearly, diplomatically is essential to your ability to influence time. Remember, there's some things you cannot control, very few, we would argue. There's a lot that you can influence in your direction, and there's plenty that you actually have control over. That depends on how well you're communicating to your associates, your paralegals, etc. Time-savvy attorneys are thus, when they are disciplined and organized, they are reliable and respected. So you probably have colleagues, of folks who you ask them where they're going to be at a certain time, what's happening with their day, and they say, yeah, I'll be in your office in a half an hour, and they're not in your office in a half an hour.
Well, I think part of it is when you have your act together from a time perspective, you can be, you've worked with those lawyers before, I've seen them in practice before, they seem to have it all together, but they're getting a lot done. And those are the people that you'd say, how are they getting so much done? And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the people who are perpetually frenzied and frantic. And what is the perception? This is why time savvy matters so much. The perception of the harried, frantic lawyer versus the perception of the lawyer who is taking their time, getting stuff done, and being there either on time or continually updating those expectations.
Right. They are perceived, and that's the right word, they're perceived as being more effective.
That's right.
It's not necessarily about the quality of their legal work, right? Although we're making the assumption here that your legal work is really solid. That's not what we're talking about here. It's about the perception that you're reliable and therefore you're respected by your clients. And in fact, time-savvy attorneys tend to have more satisfied clients. In general, we know that one of the most frequent causes for a grievance complaint is poor communication. We hear that all the time, whether it rises to the level of an actual grievance or it's just a matter of dissatisfaction that a client feels because you're not quote-unquote responsive enough. The more organized you are with your time, the more satisfied your clients will be, the easier it will be to serve them.
Bill, one of the things that is a challenge perhaps for our audience is we're going to ask them to do a lot of things that are different today and change some behaviors. Let's talk about the barriers to change and what might keep them from adopting some of the things that we have on the plate.
Great.